You are listening to the Necropolis podcast, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Welcome to Necropolis. Jason, also known as Lone Goat from Goatcraft. We do have Shelly returning as co-host today. Shelly is from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. And we do want to thank him very much. It's pretty late over in England right now. And he also has a Christmas cold. So I want to thank Shelly a lot for joining today.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I am feeling rough as arseholes. So apologies if I start sneezing and coughing at any point. But yeah, glad to be here.
And he does have his stereotypical English tea.
I do, yeah. It's doing wonders.
Cool. So our guest today is the wonderful S. Craig Zahler. He has been on this program before, and we had a great chat all over the place, but we'll try to keep it a little bit more focused today. So Zahler, he recently released a second graphic novel called Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. And I picked it up, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of like classic science fiction, but more based in like with scientific backing behind it, and especially like even some biological aspects. So I was like, holy crap, he put that in there. Really, really awesome book, and I highly recommend it. I wrote a review of it up on HateMeditations.com if you want to check that out. But Zahler, thank you for coming back on the program today.
Thank you for having me, and I enjoyed our previous chat. You and I have been in touch, a few times since then, and I appreciate your kind words regarding the graphic novel. That was, I didn't do it because of the pandemic, but it actually timed out that I started writing it the day the shutdown really got serious here in New York City, which was kind of mid-March 2020. And so I started writing the story that was going to be the story for the comic on that day, and I actually finished drawing the final page more than a year later when I got my first vaccine. So it sort of like really spans that period of time, and is the single most time-consuming artistic enterprise of my life. And glad to hear you enjoy it, and the responses thus far have been really strong. I've gotten cool blurbs from famous folks and nice reviews, and I'm happy to see that it's being well received, and certainly reflects my interest in the kind of science fiction that I'm interested in, which is hard science fiction and science-based stuff where you like the story is set in motion by different scientific anomalies and discoveries, and that pushes stuff forward. It isn't just robots with lasers and spaceships, but actually has that sort of sense of wonder that most of my favorite stories in the genre do. So I'm glad you responded to it positively, and thanks for the review.
Yeah, and I noticed the storytelling, and it's just phenomenal with all the characters and the backgrounds, like in all of your works, like the movies Bone Tomahawk, Brawl, and Cell Block 99, and Dragged Across Concrete, as well as the Forbidden Surgeries of the Hideous Dr. Divinus. You are a master of painting an atmosphere. I know you go by the nickname Realm Builder. You had a project called that, but you really do, and you build the backstories to every facet of the story. Is very multifaceted. There's a lot of different nuances that are interwoven together, and it just makes it so much more compelling. And I was brushing up a little bit. I watched a couple of interviews you've done on YouTube, and just learning all these different aspects of like your work ethic. Like you would spend like 12 hours a day or at night, because you sleep during the day. I learned that about you.
Yes.
It's not very common that people sleep during the day and then they're up at night working, but it seems to work for you in a phenomenal fashion, because great master of storytelling, and just all around, like a lot of people throw around that term jack of trades, master of none. No, you're quite a master at quite a few aspects of what you delve into, whether it's filmmaking, writing, graphic novels or novels, across the board. Just very phenomenal what you do, and very privileged. And for our listeners on this podcast, Zahler used to be a writer for Metal Maniacs. He used to write for them, so he is one of us. He is extreme metal fans. So the second part of this podcast, we will be delving into some metal stuff. Um, so uh, so like you said, in regard to hard science, the I really don't want to spoil the story too much, but
Yeah, that's the thing. I've done a couple podcasts and YouTube things where I've talked about it, and I always prefer to say, less rather than more on it, because I spent so much time building the story, and all my writing process has surprised myself daily. So I certainly didn't know where a lot of this was heading when I was writing it, and I imagine the reader experience is similar. So I am certainly reluctant past a certain point to discuss any of what's going on in there. But feel free to fire away if you have questions. And let me just back up and say thanks for all the compliments that were in that, in those couple of paragraphs you threw out. I threw out. I really appreciate it. One of the reasons I felt emboldened enough to do this graphic novel and the previous one is because I'm very confident in my skills as a storyteller. And it's the kind of thing, like when I did my first movie as a director, Bone Tomahawk, it was the kind of thing where there are temptations every day, every moment, to make things simpler, to drop things and to lose things. And I just knew, I'm like, the purest creative experience was when I was alone in a room writing the script. And so I just tried to deliver what I wrote as well as possible. And there's the common opinion of there's the movie you write, there's the movie you edit, and there's the movie you write, the movie you shoot, and the movie you edit. But for me, that's one and the same. And my movies are extremely accurate to my scripts, and so that helped me with the comics, where I'm like, particularly with Forbidden Searchings of the Hideous Doctor to Venus, I'm like, okay, I haven't drawn for a long time, and I'm certainly below par compared to people who are doing professional comics. But I was confident that the story, the dialogue, the characters, the atmosphere, that all of that would be at a level that, unless someone was just absolutely repelled by the artwork or just couldn't get past it, that the story would be worth telling. And then once I had that experience, which was really successful for me, and everyone talked about how clean and clear the storytelling was, which for me was the biggest question going in. I was more confident with the second one, which it's a good thing to have when you sit down for 2,800 hours and 14 months working on a project without really sharing it with anyone along the way. You want to have confidence that people are going to understand it at the end, and I hope enjoy it as well.
Yeah. So the main character Carlton, without spoiling it, but he does have some of the Byronic characteristics. Is that kind of like a archetype that's pretty much in all of your works? Because I know in Bone Tomahawk and Brawl and Soul Block 99 and Dragged Across Concrete, there are some very flawed characters with dark pasts, and there's obstacles they have to come, to redeeming themselves. So is that always a common thread in your works?
I mean, it's to me, it's I'm looking to make stuff that's morally interesting. And if you have a bunch of heroic characters who are flawless going through, it starts to be kind of uninteresting. And there are characters in the graphic novel, in Organisms, who are cleaner in terms of their history, and there are ones who have more objectionable stuff going on. So in general, in the case with this specific comic, I was looking for a unique journey for him, and then Kenneth Yamazaki, who I consider kind of the other leading character of it, and they both have pretty different paths in terms of what leads them on. And it's also an ensemble piece, and for all the talk of Bone Tomahawk and the Kurt Russell aspect of it, I wrote it and I always saw it as an ensemble, and I think it plays out that way. Obviously, Kurt Russell is more famous than the other three main dudes in it, but to me, I approach it as an ensemble, and this was similar. The journey for Carlton Land and Kenneth Yamazaki is fleshed out more, and They're and more indirect than it is for some of the other characters. So I think by default, from that amount of time, they will feel that way. But yeah, I like to explore those uncomfortable spaces, and particularly if you're making something big about human achievement, sort of folding into that all of the flaws and the things that you may have to accept that you don't particularly love, for humanity to transcend. To me, it's especially interesting to explore in this context rather than, say, the Wild West, or modern day streets with the city or the prison. Like, this is a really different context for it, because the larger concern is actually not originating with the human race, and then what does humanity put forth to deal with it, and who would go forth to actually deal with it. So
It's
yeah,
very,
it's certainly something I look to do.
yeah, it's very the aspect of Alien. Like a lot of Alien movies and sci-fi, that they're actually like beings that we can somewhat relate to, like they're humanoid and all that. This is a different can of worms.
Yeah, and that for me is something. And this is probably, like, my mom is interested in science fiction. Probably, there's certainly things that she said to me when I was little that resonated, and and something like when she's saying something negative, maybe about like Star Trek or something like that. It's like, they're really just kind of people. Like, they're not especially alien. So I've written a number of things with aliens, and they are, like mostly screenplays that haven't been made. But I'm definitely not thinking of something that looks like me but has pointy ears, or looks like me but has green skin and some ridges. And I enjoy some Star Trek stuff, so this isn't to bash that. I think sometimes that show has genuine science fiction premises and cool extrapolations, and then sometimes it isn't that at all. It depends, and then you need to accept things like there's some transporter that can just disassemble people at a fundamental particle level and reassemble them at a distance with nothing to receive them, and like, you need to accept some stuff like that might, like, that I don't want to put into my science fiction. And if I'm dealing with say something like faster than light travel, come up with a novel way to deal with something like that rather than just say warp speed.
It's really that suspicion of disbelief that a lot of people just go along with it. And like Star Trek was like, it's so fantastical and doesn't resemble reality at all, but they just go along with it as popcorn entertainment, I guess. But yeah, you're putting the science into the science fiction here, and it's very, very cool stuff. Like that parallel that I drew in that review about Robert Sheckley, Specialist, especially. He took it as a, like, the aspects of the aliens are kind of humanesque or humanish, but yours is based really in science. But there's similarity to both those stories that I really love a lot.
I've not read that story. I should probably check it out. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the things, like, when people talk about say these UAVs, the what is it, the unidentified aerial vehicle, they want to move away from UFO, that term. And when this is the stuff that was declassified, whatever, like a year and a half ago. And, I enjoy the X-Files, but I don't believe anyone's ever been abducted by an alien. And to me, it's just sort of like coming at it, like, scientifically, like the idea that these aliens are smart enough to get here, smart enough to, like, abduct people and be stealthy about it, but to be caught regularly all the time by truckers in the Midwest and going up and down the highways.
Yeah, why would you travel across? Why would you travel across the universe just to abduct a cow? Like, it makes no sense.
Right. So there's some of that sort of stuff, like the idea that they're so smart that they can come here and that they're curious about us, but want to remain hidden, but yet they're at the level where they can cross the universe, they can abduct people, but they're getting caught all the time. So to me, that, like, and I don't have an explanation for all those UAV things that are, where they're like, well, this is moving it, this has been captured by government planes, and they're moving at a speed that it can't. But like my thought is like, if there's, I do believe that there's alien life somewhere, but I don't think it's going around on this planet with like anal probes. That to me seems like pretty unlikely. That they're basically kind of humanoids, that they're brilliant enough to get across the galaxy, but then clumsy enough to get constantly caught, and also that they're all going to be on like this relatively human scale. And like it seems, you know what tardigrades are?
No, sir.
You do or don't?
No, sir. No.
Okay, so tardigrades, also called, they have a couple different names. I think one of the names is maybe water bear, and then another name
Oh,
is.
yeah, and they can survive in space, right?
So they can survive in space, and you look at it, and it has 8 legs, which is pretty uncommon for any kind of creature, and it can also survive long periods of dehydration. And like once it's hydrated, it's not going to live for long. But I think it's far more likely that something that or something like that is actually an alien rather than like a little dude with giant, black almond-shaped eyes, dressed like a wizard and going around and taking people. So again, this is stuff that I look at I think it is very likely that like somewhere in the universe there is life. But the idea that it's roughly humanoid, it's trying to do all this stuff stealthily, but constantly getting caught out. It's like they're going to be able to do, like if they have that technology, they're going to be able to do this or not. They'll also maybe be a microscopic tardigrade size, or the size of a city. To think that they're also just on human scale is also kind of limiting. So, anyways, all of this is the stuff that I'm thinking when I go in and create the aliens for organisms from an ancient cosmos, and coming up with their reasons. But there's brilliant science fiction out there, but most of the stuff that I think is really great, with the exception of 2001, which is my favorite movie ever. Most of the great science fiction is I'm reading it in a book or a short story. Like that's where it goes. And a lot of times, by the time it becomes a Hollywood movie, it sort of is embracing certain tropes. And there's a lot of Hollywood science fiction that's technology run amok and kind of anti-technology and sort of anti-science in a way that I don't find that spirit running through, say, Greg Egan, who I think is the all-time greatest science fiction writer. His stuff is absolutely brilliant. And in the best, like old Arthur C. Clarke stuff, like Rendezvous with Rama, Childhood's End, and Ted Chiang has 2 short story collections in terms of contemporary stuff that are absolutely brilliant, particularly the second one. So there are really smart people doing it, but much more just stories than stories in novels than in movies.
Yeah, when that UAP stuff started coming out a couple of years ago, there's multiple different, instruments recording the same objects that are moving, very, very quickly that, the human body couldn't withstand. And it makes you think like this, anti-gravity device of some sort. But people, like, everyone always like, it's aliens, it's aliens, it's aliens. There could be other theories. It could be, it could be time travelers. It could be, the oceans are still, Lovecraft derived all this horror from the unknown aspect of the oceans and all of that. It could be, some sea creatures that are more advanced than us have just been hiding. Who knows? But everyone always wants to jump to it's aliens, it's aliens, it's aliens. I think it's more likely there's Bigfoot running around than aliens.
Yes. Well, because and that would make sense that there's just some branch of humanity that evolved a different way. I'm not a real a Sasquatch enthusiast. So I've heard some firsthand stories recounted by people who think they've seen that.
Glenn
but I
Bitton
think
saw one.
What? Who saw one?
Glenn Bitton from Deicide saw one.
Oh, well, maybe not the most reliable scientific source, but perhaps. But it's possible also that he is one. I
have my own theories.
Like with, yeah, but with the the UAV stuff, it's interesting. I mean, it's cool to speculate, but there's always something. Like there was there's this pilot, and I watched him interview. Like I watched a ton of that, like Lex Friedman, his YouTube show. Like that was on a lot while I was writing this and drawing this. It's certainly one of my favorite programs. Recently, he's just getting a lot more celebrities and political speakers, which interests me far, far, far less than all the scientists he had on. But he did have a guy, maybe his name is David Fravor, who was piloting a jet and had this like up close encounter with this. And he's talking about how he's trained by the military for this like split second timing for all of the potential, I guess, dog fighting that he would be doing in a jet. You would probably know better than I. But he is this trained top professional flying some, extremely expensive craft and all this sort of stuff. And he tells this story about this giant tic tac that he saw that then zooms away, moving, like standing still, moving to incredible speeds. That nothing he could think of moved at. And he's telling this story, and it's compelling. And I'm thinking, like, so this guy, but there's no video, and they have video on those planes. And I'm thinking, so this guy is like the top of the top, best trained, thinking in fractions of a second to save his life. And nowhere in this process, when he moves his jet to have like an up close interaction with this tic tac, he ever thinks to put on the video camera to get it. So unless one believes that happened and he's lying about that in terms of recording it, and then that material remains classified, there tend to be those sort of little loopholes with that sort of stuff. I mean, I read the Whitley Strieber or Strieber, however you say his name, Communion book, and man, there were more loopholes than sentences in that book. Like, and none of that matched up or was convincing. But I mean, I remain interested in this stuff, and although it just sounds like I'm a gigantic debunker, that's where I'm coming at things from a scientific standpoint. And in a way, it's also how I write characters for my pieces, and it's a reason that my scripts, my finished movies are like my scripts, because the actors get it and they don't look at it and think like, oh man, I don't understand why my character is doing this. Why is he going here? Why is she doing this? And all that sort of stuff. Because I've thought through the motivations, all the stuff, and it drives it, so that like by the time they're looking at it, it makes sense. And the same thing with how I conceive of an alien race and interactions with them is just coming from that place of looking at stuff differently. It's certainly not believing in the kind of the pop culture, version of an alien or a bunch of abduction stories, because I don't believe in those.
Did you like Annihilation? The movie Annihilation?
Not particularly. And I like some stuff that Jeff Vandermeer has written. I thought that one was I thought it lost its way in terms of just, it became very pretty at a certain point, but I really wasn't with the characters, nor did I feel it had, I just feel it was kind of like a horror movie with some sci-fi in the background, as compared to like Arrival, which is actually based on a Ted Chiang story. And to me, that's like, in terms of a mainstream movie that is genuine science fiction, they forced in some stuff in there that wasn't in the story that felt like forced Hollywood stuff. But that was more to my taste than Annihilation. Are you a fan of Annihilation?
No, I thought the movie sucked until the ending, when it got to the alien creature thing, where it was more like a fungus or virus, or what, I don't know how to describe it, but it had that otherworldliness that wasn't humanoid at all, even though it did kind of mimic humans. But
yeah,
I like the ending, but I didn't like the rest of the movie. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, no, I don't remember it. That I saw it in the theater, and I was like, oh, that was kind of disappointing the way that went. A lot of the visuals are strong. There's some strong performers there. I didn't think it was bad. I was just, not interested in terms of things like that have been out there. I think Arrival is much better. And I have a screenplay that goes pretty deep in on string theory that I currently have like in the hands of some people. this isn't for me to direct because I don't want to direct something where I'm going to spend half a year of my life criticizing CG shots. So it'd be something I would hope someone else would direct. But Arrival is, I think that one is strong. And then also the movie Moon by Duncan Jones, David Bowie's son. That was great. I saw that, I think, 3 times in the theater. That was good, strong science fiction. Doesn't have alien stuff, but
You said Moon, right?
Yes.
I love that one. I love the twist in it. And I actually told Marco Alejo, because he's really into science fiction, to check out Moon. Hopefully he has, because it looks like it has your approval and it has my approval. So just needs that Be Heard approval.
Yeah. Very cool.
Go ahead, Shelley.
I was just going to say, I think the best sci-fi often proposes the scientific element as like the premise to say, like, if we altered the world in this one specific way, how would events play out? And going back to like the earlier sci-fi from the 50s and 60s, you mentioned sort of Arthur C. Clarke. I'd add Eric Frank Russell and Asimov to that as well, and sort of the writers for the analog sci-fi series, which work really well as like short stories because they are proposing that premise and just sort of playing it out over the course of like a short kind of piece of text. And some, you mentioned Arrival, and some of the like that has sometimes translated into films, but often this best sci-fi tends to get a bit more philosophical than that. Just to rush in and defend Star Trek as well, they do sometimes toy with that, and especially non-human aliens. But whenever they're using, humanoid aliens with forehead bumps or pointy ears or whatever, it tends to be like almost like an ethical thought experiment where they say they encounter a society that has like some hidden aspect to them that, they have to figure out how to treat them and stuff. And I always found that more interesting. I was talking specifically about like classic Star Trek and Next Generation, not necessarily the 2009 film, but yeah, that kind of sci-fi is the stuff that really, really chimes with me, where they're just toying with the ideas and using the science and using the ideas to basically play out a little thought experiment and see where it takes them.
Yeah, I mean that absolutely. And as I said, like I had a criticism for Star Trek, but also that is a really popular thing that had some scientifically compelling episodes. And then when it just gets to more in, I guess, a fantasy zone of similar cultures, and they have bumps on the head and the ears, or they growl, or they've got a weird knife, and but otherwise they're seemingly pretty human. Yeah, then you can just get into sort of like anthropological sciences, and there's some interesting stuff that happens there as well. So it's not like even when they embrace that it's not in that realm at all. But it's certainly in terms of how I conceive aliens or think is most likely. I think a tardigrade is a lot more likely than ET in terms of what's out there, like something that's really far afield and on a completely different scale. But yeah, all that golden age of science fiction that really started with, it was like, I think it was like Joseph Campbell was the editor for I think it was Astounding Stories, this pulp, and there's like some 1939 issue that has all of these like really important science fiction people, and he started saying like, this is going to be a little bit less the Edgar Rice Burroughs space fantasy, where it could really just be a Western, but swap out the Indians with people with green skin, and they were really these kind of like romance adventure tales. And where he said like Campbell, I think in the Astounding Stories or Astounding Science Fiction, whichever it was, I think it was one and maybe changed to the other, where that was sort of the mandate, like there needs to be science pushing it forward, and that's what distinguishes most of the science fiction that I enjoy. And sometimes it's a little bit more backdrop, and I am a fan of Philip K. Dick, and some of his stuff really has that. And sometimes it's a little bit more, he's just giving you a weird future setting, and then you might have some conspiracy paranoia stuff, and there's tech in there, but it isn't all springing forth so much from the idea of like, well, this new thing has been invented and or discovered, and it has altered society in this way. But yeah, I agree, and because of the philosophical nature of it, I think it's less. You see it less in movies, and I believe also because movies, particularly expensive Hollywood movies, really want to hand you a moral. If you do something that's legitimately ambiguous on that, like really good science fiction on artificial intelligence, won't be artificial intelligence is running amok and ruining the world. And they're going to be good, like probably both sides of this would be discussed. And then maybe the rights of these things at a point at which they're sentient and aware of a lifespan. But it's easier in a movie to say they've run amok and they've gone evil, let's shut it down, which is a little bit, that's a little bit of a thing that was forced into Arrival, when the story that Arrival is based on by Ted Chiang, which is called, I think, The Story of Your Life, is just much better and subtler, and just allows more conjecture and moral ambiguity as opposed to like kind of spoon feeding you some stuff. So that's a tricky thing with Hollywood entertainment, which typically is showing technological innovations as bad. And though a difference in the Jurassic Park book and the Jurassic Park movie, because the book really had the viewpoint of this genetic engineering is against nature, and like the dude who runs the park in the book is I believe I remember this correctly. I mean, I read this thing like 30 years ago, but I believe he is eviscerated by the dinosaurs and not living on for sequels. And it was really this idea of he messed with nature and now must pay. Whereas the movie actually had a little bit more. The movie had a little bit more of a science fiction point of view of, well, the landing moment is like, oh, dinosaurs are really more like birds. And now actually in paleontology, birds are just classified as dinosaurs. So when you say the dinosaur died out, you say the non-avian dinosaurs died out, because so much overlap in the gene pool is there that they're sort of classified thus. But that was an idea, that was like a legitimate science idea that was put out by Jurassic Park, whereas the book was very much like, this dude is messing with nature and now he must be eviscerated by raptors. Very, it's a very different attitude actually than the movie. And I think actually in one of the few instances where the movie, I believe, was smarter than the book.
Yeah, and it's known for being like one of the exceptions that proves the rule, I guess, among sort of big budget Hollywood films, in that it did really attempt to bring the very latest cutting edge science as far as dinosaurs were concerned to the film itself, which really kind of elevated the plot as well. And yeah, you're right, kind of made it a very distinct entity from the source material.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing also I read a really good, I think Stephen Brusatte, I don't know how to say his name, The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs. Fantastic paleontology book. And you get the full story, including like the Precambrian stuff. It's great. And but you see how many people, this guy who wrote this like key book on dinosaurs, and how many people he's visiting, and how many of them are into dinosaurs because they grew up with Jurassic Park. So I'm turning 50 this month. So this guy's a generation or so young, like decade or whatever younger than I am. But you see the impact, and while lots of people want to make kind of heavy-handed, obvious moral movies that are pretty much always preaching to the choir in terms of like benefiting society, I think Jurassic Park had a greater benefit to society, and I mean specifically the scientific community, than most movies that just tell you war is bad, which everyone knows, or bullying is bad, or you should accept people that are different than you are. They're giving you these like up the middle messages everyone agrees with, and in a general kind of simplified sense, I don't know how many people are sort of against America entering World War II. That doesn't seem hugely controversial. But in any case, like I look at Jurassic Park as this is an entertainment, fun summer movie, and the actual effects of that movie being out there in the world are, inspiring a whole new generation of people to get into paleontology and advancing that science. The same way Star Trek really inspired like tons of people who are in NASA and in the space program will talk about at some point in childhood being into Star Trek. So, that all of that stuff to me is cool. And rather than a movie that lectures you and tells you how to think, something that inspires you to have greater interest in something, to me is a far greater achievement.
Very cool, very cool. Are there any metal releases that you believe is like faithful to science fiction or like hard science, or is it all too fantastical, like Nocturnus?
Well, I did think of them right away, but I'm not, I'm a metalhead since the '80s. Was writing for Metal Maniacs in the '90s and doing my own fanzine before that. The lyrics are not what I'm here for. Sometimes it's gravy on something that's good, but I say that I'm sure there are some really smart science fiction lyrics in some metal out there, and possibly even some in my large personal collection. But I'm not thinking of anything where I was like, oh, the science really did this. There was something that really had a great science fiction ambiance. Let me pull it out. So I don't remember it was the Last Beads of Flesh album, which I remember reviewing them back in the day when they were sort of in a transition from this kind of brutal guttural band, like the Gradually Melted band, to a more technical direction. And and back then I didn't like the direction they were going in. I didn't think they were doing it especially well. Maybe Passive the Weakening, I think, was probably the album I reviewed. So Nucleus, that's what I thought it was. So this album certainly puts me in that cosmic mindset and seems to have a little bit of that alien sci-fi vibe. Like it reminds me in some ways of, and I don't know if it's pronounced Oxyplagates, or maybe it's not pronounced either of those ways, but they have an album called Sidereal Journey. And that is a sort of a similar thing. Like I really am getting the space journey with it, but I can't say that these lyrics are scientifically compelling because it's death metal, and I understand less, and I understand probably less than half of what's being said unless I'm staring at a lyric sheet.
First of all, Jason, can I congratulate you on that segue? That was great. From sci-fi to metal.
I have another segue. So while I was in England,
let me ask. Are there for you guys? Are there any metal albums with some sort of scientific edge that really stands out for you?
I mean, Carcass.
Well, I was going to say that it's not Voivod and it's not Nocturnus, but it's the first three Carcass albums, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that is a science. I actually was looking at I saw Carcass in concert a few weeks ago, and I was spinning symphonies. I got that like full dynamic range version on CD, and it really does sound better. And looking at those lyrics, I'm like, some of these are words I don't know, but I wonder, are all of these actual words? When I look at the lyrics for on Symphony of Sickness, like I'm not sure that perhaps it all is, and it's just like a number of words I don't know. But some of these seem a little bit on the made up side of things. But I'm not sure. Maybe every last if either of you have spent a ton of time with the lyrics on that album, maybe you could answer. Well, but I was looking at it like some of these seem like words I don't know, but some of this just seems a little bit like Jabberwocky gobbledygook.
They did consult biological textbooks at the time that they were writing, but I did actually chat when I was back at university. I chatted with a friend of mine who was a medical student, and I showed her some Carcass lyrics. She said they are all, as far as you could tell, actual words, but the stuff they're doing with them, like what they're saying is happening in each track. Well, it's obviously a lot of it's not physically possible, but it doesn't quite make sense. It's like if I took a bunch of German words and attempted to make a sentence out of it, but all the grammar was completely wrong, so it didn't actually make sense. It's like that, the medical equivalent of that is how I could describe it.
Yeah, it's not like maybe a little bit of like you Google Translate to your language, and then just some cut and paste.
Pretty much, yeah. It's basically like using a Google Translate, but with medical terminology. Yeah.
Sure.
I saw a picture of Tom Hanks wearing a Carcass shirt a few years ago. So maybe you can get, Tom Hanks for a future movie if your shared love of Carcass.
You sure that wasn't photoshopped? It's hard for me to imagine. He is actually very recently. I had flipped something his way, and then I heard, as is the usual, when I'm sending stuff around to actors, like, ooh, this is too violent. So I don't think the script is as violent as a Carcass song, but you never know. In terms of him wearing a shirt, this seems like this would have been a Photoshop thing. It's hard for me to imagine he's listening to Carcass, but I could be wrong.
No. I'm Louder Sound 2021. Jeff Walker. Tom Hanks used to play Carcass. That was the headline. So yeah, I guess Tom Hanks and Carcass is
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, another thing to like about the likable Tom Hanks. I think he also does a lot of. I'm interested in World War II stuff, and he has been very involved with a lot of recordings of veterans before they passed, and I think both of those miniseries, The Pacific and Band of Brothers. So good for him. He likes Carcass, and he's carrying the torch forward in terms of World War II memorial stuff and preservation.
Yeah. So, what was special about I mean, I know you love Carcass and have your list of favorite records up here. Did they play like primarily newer stuff? A lot of bands they'll only play like a few classics and then play a lot of their new.
No, it was a good set. I mean, it was the show that was going around, Cattle Decapitation, who I've seen multiple times and never had any use for. Like they can play their instruments. It's just I just don't like the music. So I saw some of their set, but I think I've seen them like 3 or 4 times. There's a period is like Nile is going around. They're going to be on it. Morbid Angel's going around. They're going to be like, they just kept getting thrown on tours here. Very rare. So I've seen them a bunch of times. They're like, if you like their music, they're probably a good live act, but I don't, and I didn't. So it was this tour that was Cattle Decapitation, Obituary, Carcass, and Amon Amarth. And Amon Amarth, they have 2 albums I really enjoy. I like Versus the World and With Odin at Our Sides. Like both of those, metal. I think are.
It's beer metal.
Yeah, I think both of those are really. They're doing what they set out to do. It's certainly pretty simple, but the hooks on those are really strong. And I was curious. I knew their live show was a big thing. I did not know that if they're playing a place that has. So this was the Hammerstein. Maybe it has a different name now. Maybe they're calling it like the Manhattan Ballroom. So this thing was packed. I'm going to make up a number and say it's like 5,000 people. I've seen wrestling shows there. I saw Dio there. I saw Maiden there in the Blaze Bayley era. I've seen Yngwie there. I've seen a bunch of different artists there. And it was a surprise to me that a tour that has Obituary and Carcass and Amon Amarth, that Amon Amarth is absolutely the main ticket seller and significantly more popular than Obituary and Carcass. That was a surprise to me, but I'm not really in touch with, I don't know with album sales and things like that. Like, is that something that both of you would have known, that they're going to be the serious, that a show is going to have Amon Amarth, Carcass, and Obituary, and it's basically going to be an Amon Amarth show with special guests, which is actually how they had it listed on the ticket.
No, I think my knowledge of other people being in the metal, I think Obituary might be the most popular band, quote unquote, out of all of those. I know Carcass is insanely popular, but the Amon Amarth crew, they have all the Viking aesthetic, so there might be people there to see Amon Amarth that aren't really into metal that much. They're more interested to the imagery and the beer.
Yeah, I mean, and they're doing this rowing pit thing. That's funny. It's super likable and good live. So in terms of in terms of that show in particular, the sound was terrible where I was sitting. Like I like to be above the crowd. I'm like, you know, a little over 5'9", so I'm not a tall dude. And being in a fracas, I certainly don't want to be. I don't want to be anywhere near a mosh pit, but I also don't want to be moving around and jockeying around to try and see the band. Like I'm going to the show to see the band, and so the acoustics were terrible where I was, and they might have been better elsewhere, but they were just awful. And so, Cattle Decapitation just wasn't anything for me to really comment on because I don't know the music well. It just doesn't appeal to me. But Obituary came out and they did. It was interesting. I saw them. That was like the first show that I went to in let's say like after more than a year of not going to shows with the pandemic was Obituary, and they were touring around with Prong, who unfortunately went before them, so I had to watch a Prong set happen. But then I was able to get out of there before Black Label Society started.
You didn't want to snap your fingers, snap your neck?
I didn't want to snap my fingers nor my neck. I just wanted them to be done.
Did Obituary play Bullituary with Ice-T?
They did not. But when I saw Obituary on that show, that was kind of what it was. A ton of Cause of Death on that show, which was, I guess, this is 2021, I believe, and nothing from World Demise, which is my favorite album of theirs. And
there's a picture of me. I'm sorry for jumping in. There's a picture of me out there with doing a keg stand with a World Demise shirt on. Did I ever send that to you?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, and that's the one for me, because I think, like, I know Cause of Death, everyone, like, that's the default. Everyone absolutely loves that one. I think a bunch of those songs sound like he just didn't feel like singing in spots that need singing. There's so many songs where the arrangement just goes to these other parts, and why aren't there vocals there? Because he didn't feel like doing it, which is my understanding kind of how he works, maybe a little bit in the Ozzy way of music happens, and then he just picks the spots where he wants to do it. But I feel that there are like 12 or more parts on that album where it's just like, oh, there should be singing here, but there's not. It's sort of like Gangland by Iron Maiden. There's like a solo, and then there's like the other 4 measures for another solo to happen, but there's just nothing happening. So when I would listen to that song,
didn't write lyrics for a lot of it. It's just kind of him babbling, which I think might have been a factor as well. There's no actual stanzas or anything.
Sure, and but he could have just growled up something. I just think that there's Cause of Death I like. I'm not going to bag on that album. There's a reason that I think World Demise is much better, because I think the best thing Obituary to me has 2 best elements. One is their overall sound. Like, this is a band that was certainly really different than Morbid Angel and Death and Carcass in terms of intricacy. They're like, no, we're the original Cavemen. So I think their sound is really good, and then I think Tardy is live and in the studio like one of the best death metal vocalists ever. So like World Demise, you're getting tons of his catchy choruses, like, you know, and all that sort of stuff. So when I saw them a year plus ago, they did a lot of Cause of Death. They did a lot of Slowly Rot stuff, and then a couple things off of the recent self-titled, and I think that was pretty much the set. Oh, and Redneck Stomp off of the whatever Frozen in Time, or whatever, the Frozen Obituary album. This time, there was only they played 8 songs, maybe 7. So it was a much shorter set, and they played only one song from Cause of Death, and it was Circle of the Tyrants. So they're playing a cover, like doing a Celtic Frost song as your only song off of your most popular album is an interesting choice. I mean, I wanted to see different stuff, but the choices weren't superb. They did do Don't Care off of World Demise. So I was like, yes, okay, this time at least I got one song off of my favorite album. They did, and I really like Inked in Blood. That's probably my second favorite by them. They did songs off of that, but not the songs I like. So that one was sort of a victim of they just happened, for me, they happened to pick a lot of songs I wasn't that into. They played a new song that sounded pretty good. I mean, I pretty much enjoy all their albums, and I think there's a noticeable lack of greatness, but a well of goodness with their releases. And then Carcass, I saw Carcass once a long time ago. I guess this was the first time. This was right when they got back together. This might have been before. This might have been before Surgical Steel came out. They were touring. They had Michael Amott there, so it was him and Bill Steer, and they brought out Ken Owen, who obviously had suffered a stroke, and he got a standing ovation. That's one of the most emotional things I've ever seen in a metal show, because I learned to.
Sorry to jump in. I believe I probably saw them on the same tour because they got Ken Owen out and he did like a drum solo for a bit, and the crowd were going absolutely mad for it, and that was very powerful. Yeah,
I mean, I got I certainly had tears in my eyes, and I could say he wasn't the most technically perfect death metal drummer, and I back in the Metal Maniacs days before I was actually a writer, I wrote in a letter because they were talking about metal drumming and didn't mention him. But I think creatively, I'll take a Ken Owen over a Gene Hoglan or an Askey or Mickelson any day. His shit is so creative and so thoughtful. You can tell their drum parts written by a songwriter, and he wrote songs for the band. And I learned to play death metal drums. I first got my double bass pedal, and it was just and it was playing Heartwork. I would play Heartwork and then Embodiment. Those two songs off of the Heartwork album. That was me first learning how to play more extreme drums and the rock stuff I knew. So I have that kind of connection in terms of, although obviously he didn't personally teach me, learning to play the instrument by mimicking his parts and listening to it in a rehearsal space in Manhattan. So very, very powerful to see them. But I saw Carcass. I'm I don't think I ever need to see them again live. And this is something, I'll throw out to both of you. And I'm a metalhead, and metal is my favorite kind of music. But prog rock is, if you go album by album, they're neck and neck. If you go by quantity of amazing albums, no contest, metal wins. And but one of the things that I prefer a little bit more in the rock spectrum than the metal spectrum is the live show, insofar as what is the musical point of playing live? Is it just to make an attempt to reproduce the studio album as accurately as possible? That's what a lot of these bands do, because they're so technically challenged to do this material because it's so technically demanding. I mean, certain that necroticism and Heartwork and Symphony, that's no joke, that stuff. But I felt when I saw them that time, I was okay, they're delivering this material well as a band. Jeff Walker, 100% of the songs he's coming up short. His vocals are better in every song, probably almost every verse and every chorus is better on the album than live. And Carcass doesn't want my advice, but I'll offer it to them anyways. Have someone play bass, because it's not that critical. Have someone play bass. It's not that critical that Jeff Walker plays it live. So Jeff Walker can just focus on delivering the vocals as powerfully and as nuanced and as inflected as they are on the album. I don't know, Shelley, if this was your experience, but I just find 100% of the time they're coming up short in the vocal department.
Well, yeah, I've seen Carcass about 6 or 7 times. And the first time I saw them was, as I mentioned, probably on the same tour when they just reformed. And that first time I saw them at Damnation Festival in Leeds, and it was the most powerful performance because I think they just reformed. They had a point to prove. They were sort of trying to announce to the world that we're back on the scene, and they really did kill it. Then the rest, I enjoyed them every time. But it was sort of a, I don't want to say color by numbers, but it was very sort of going through the motions. But I wouldn't say that's a function of them being a metal band. I would say that's them being an older band going over their old material that everyone knows so well. And you see this a lot with either older death metal bands or bands that have had a long hiatus and then reformed. And at first, everyone gets very excited. I'm going to cite Godflesh here as another example. I was at their first show after they reformed at Hellfest, and it was the same thing. They only played for about half an hour because the idiots arrived too late, but it was the most powerful half an hour of live music I'd ever seen. And then I've seen them several times after that, and every time it's been sort of diminishing returns because they're just going through, right, we'll do Street Cleaner, we'll do a few off Pure, whatever, and then job's done. But once you've made that impact, you've reformed, you've played to a younger audience that might not have been old enough to see you the first time around, you need to do something new. When I see newer metal bands, not necessarily younger metal bands, but newer metal bands playing material that the audience isn't familiar with, you tend to recapture that spontaneity and that magic that you would expect from a live performance, because they're still figuring themselves out, still figuring their identity out as musicians, and you kind of see the tracks evolve and stuff. But with Carcass, they are just there to kind of replicate what we already expect of them, play the classics of Heartwork or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but I'll go specifically to, this is something like, so this last year I saw those bands. I saw Merciful Fate, I saw Stryper, I saw Creator, and I saw Kendrick Lamar, I saw the Griselda rap crew, I saw the Beach Boys, I saw Chicago, I saw the Doobie Brothers. So pretty diverse group of live shows that I went to. But the thing I can say with like the Doobie Brothers, and I'm not really that into the Doobie Brothers. Like I enjoy them. Like two of the three lead singers in that band, Michael McDonald, who was in the show that I saw, which is Radio City Music Hall, and forgot his name. I think Tom Johnson. Both of those guys were able to out-sing studio stuff they did in the 70s. And this is one of the reasons I think like Obituary is a particularly good live band, because Tardy can match and out-sing his performance. Where to me, Jeff Walker, and again, like if I have to pick my favorite death metal band ever, it's Carcass. But I like as a live band, there's a reason that when I saw them the one time, and they were hungrier then, and it was also cool to have Michael Ament. I was like, I don't know that I never ever need to see them again, because I found musically, and this is the thing with like what where I'm going to make the distinction between some stuff I've seen with metal and rock live. Musically, I just feel like I feel if you listen to even that show that we both saw on that same first tour, like Jeff Walker's vocals live while he's playing bass, I just think they're falling short 100% of the time of what he did in the studio. And like I just saw Merciful Fate, and I'd heard from everybody that he's like quit smoking, and he had his breath back, and he sounded great. And they did. Like he sounded like he did in the studio. They did. I mean, that show was, with the exception of one new song, that show was, like 4 tracks off of Melissa, maybe 5 tracks off of Don't Break the Oath, which is certainly my favorite, something off of Nuns Have No Fun, and he's matching it. But like, I guess the question is, what are you looking for in a live show? And when I think of my favorite live performances and favorite live bands, sometimes it is just a culmination moment, like seeing Megadeth on the Rust in Peace tour, and those guys came out and they're doing like an album that I still consider my favorite metal album ever. They're doing stuff that is at the the top of the heap, like unsurpassed, incredible riffs and stuff like that. But it's not going to be better live, because as a lot of metal music is so complex, they're trying to replicate it live. Whereas the Doobie Brothers, and again, like good Megadeth kicks the crap out of Doobie Brothers, but the Doobie Brothers live were able to vamp extra, sing extra high notes, play better solos, have the drummer do more cool stuff with errant splashes and stuff like that. So I guess the question for you, and it's just something I saw this year where I was going back and forth between metal bands, kind of classic rock acts, and rap bands or rap acts. And I was just like, like Merciful Fate albums, these are like, there's no Doobie Brothers album that remotely compares to Don't Break the Oath. And yet, like seeing King Diamond and Merciful Fate live, like it's very cool because of his presence. But musically, what here is better than it was on the album, or at least let's say comparably good but different and distinguished in some way live. And that's a little bit my question. That I put to the two of you, because I see it with rock. Like when I saw, when I saw Chicago, extended solos, new horn arrangements, extra vamping, extra backing vocals, newer, like they're giving you something new. In metal, I feel, because there's a strictness with the composition style, and the metal songs I've written are this way. Like there's a little bit more right or wrong. You're playing the riff correctly.
Yeah, I mean,
if you get a new drummer who's incredible. That really might liven it up. And it was a hope, I remember back in the day when Priest was on the Painkiller tour and they got Scott Travis, but he pretty much just played the parts that Holland had written before him, and it was disappointing. So like that was a chance for them to be better. But Priest, I have seen Priest and Halford live when they have been amazing live. He's my favorite metal singer. He's my favorite singer in the entire rock world, rock or metal or anything. I am a Halford, a huge Halford fan, and they have been incredible live because I've seen him out sing the studio performance. I've seen I've seen him just a ton of shrieks over Victim of Changes that aren't on the album. I've seen him vamp, and I've seen Rodney James Dio do it. I've seen Eric Adams and Manowar do it.
I've also seen Halford underperform against the records, but that's by the by. I saw Merciful Fate earlier this year as well at Bloodstock, and yeah, my experience definitely chimes in that I was bowled over by how good his voice was, given, they're an older band, they're older than some of the death metal bands we've been talking about. But yeah, he basically sounded like the record. But again, to go back to your point, I wasn't going to Merciful Fate looking for improvisation or elevating anything. I was going because I wanted to see the tracks performed by a live band to the best of their ability and to put on a show, and they did exactly that. And I guess it comes, well, you mentioned the point around sort of metal's formality of composition, which doesn't leave room for that kind of improvisation and stuff. But I think what I do get from live shows, not new bands, because they're bands that I'm still familiarizing myself with in terms of their sound, but a band that I'm very familiar with, I would say, is just raising the stakes for the music, raising the intensity. To take another example, I attended a London Death Fest, the first one in September this year, first and last one probably. But there were a bunch of black metal bands and death metal bands, but I catched Gorgoroth, and I've seen Gorgoroth a number of times, always with a different lineup. But this was one of the best shows they played, because they played all the tracks from pretty much the first three albums, bit of Destroyer as well, but they played them with an intensity. Oh, cool. Yeah, they played them with an intensity and a drama that just really elevated the whole experience, and you just get almost like a ritual or something. And you can get that from the album if you create the right vibe and stuff, but it's not replicable unless it's in the live setting, as far as I'm concerned. And that's what I know that other genres of music do that when they're performed live. It is also about like the spontaneity and stuff, but there is a sort of high drama to a lot of metal shows that really comes out when you see it performed live, that you just can't get from listening to the record, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That intensity can absolutely be ramped. I mean, I'll always remember Dave Mustaine coming out in his white button-up T-shirt, and then playing "Take No Prisoners" on that tour. And actually, I remember Marty Friedman busting a string at the end of it. And this is 32 years ago or whatever when I saw this. So it was super memorable, and the audience was so hungry for them, like the roaring for them to come out. After they'd finished, and also on Clash of the Titans when they were going around with, Anthrax, who were always annoying live. Anytime I've seen them, but I'm just not a fan of their music. And Slayer, when someone lit some like quarter stick of like dynamite when they announced Angel of Death, and I will never know what happened, because I just looked around and I saw like 200 people running in different directions. This is in the Miami Arena for the Clash of the Titans tour, which is like Alice in Chains, Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth. But the hunger for Megadeth to do more after they'd finished, and Mustaine just comes out like, "You've been great, we've been Megadeth," and just walks off. Like, that intensity is great. Like, the ritual live intensity is, this is a reason that all of these bands that I like, I make the effort for. But like, after I've had that experience, maybe you want it repeatedly. Like, I just wish there was a little bit more taken out of the page of like, well, this is some shit we wrote 30 years ago. Let's bring in something. And it doesn't mean like, let's play A Dangerous Meeting and do it as a reggae song. Like, I'm not talking like some like dramatic and irritating reworking. I just, most of my favorite live metal experiences have been because there was a singer so on top of the material, they were able to give you extras, or a drummer able to do it, because a lot of the guitar stuff is a little bit more locked in terms of the stuff that I've seen. Like I've seen Morbid Angel with 3 different lead vocalists, and the last time I saw it, they seemed completely detached. It seemed like 4 guys not looking at each other, Steve Tucker interacting with the audience, Trey off in his own world, which is usually where he is. The drummer might as well have been in another building. You know, he's playing, and it's not Pete Sandoval. I forgot this guy's name, and he's solid, but like he's playing. You know, a lot of these guys have a pulse and have a click going in their ear, but there's like not that connectivity. But that, yeah, I mean, that rush and that ritual, that I think that is, I agree with you, and I think that's there, and that's why I do it. But you know, in terms of some of these bands, but like when I saw Carcass this time, the selection was good. It was like, I know Incarnated Solvent Abuse was on there. The Carnal Forge was on there. Heartwork was on there. They did some stuff off of the new one. Like it was a good mix. I enjoyed it. They did the closer off of the new one, which is one of the best. The sound was terrible. So that's I'm not going to hold that against Carcass. That's just the venue, but yeah, they played. I'm trying to remember what other stuff. Maybe
when I saw them, they played a few off symphonies as well, but sometimes they'll touch it.
Yeah, and this wasn't a long show. I'm thinking it was mostly necroticism. And then there was like, you know, at some point they just leapt into the end. I forget which, like, I mean, as much as I love that album, not like the names of the tracks haven't stuck with me that well, because they are, you know, necroticism, Descanting and Salubrious tracks. Like it's a mouthful, but it was a good selection. Like I was of the bands that I had interest in, their selection was definitely the best. And the Amon Amarth is like, for me, there are only 2 albums of theirs I really liked, and they played 1 song off of those 2 albums. So it was a bunch of stuff I didn't.
Just to answer your question earlier about their popularity, is the biggest open air festival we have in the UK is Bloodstock for metal, and they are a regular headliner there. They will always be top billed alongside your Megadeths and so on. So they are a very popular band, at least in Europe.
Yeah, no, and they're fans, and they're super personable. Like I had a fun time watching them. I didn't know a ton of the songs. I mean, I'd heard some of the other albums that I think are just fine, but they're really personable. The main guy's very likable. Like there's you know, like some of these bands you'll see, Testament being some of the worst examples I can remember. And again, I didn't want to see Testament. Them opening for bands I wanted to see. But like where they're just badgering you, go crazy, or you're whippy. They were better in Boston, or that sort of stuff. And Amon Amarth is the opposite. They're constantly telling the crowd how great they are. There's like a very positive feedback loop going on between pretty much the Amon Amarth singer. The rest of those guys are just sort of like mute guys with very nice hair doing their stuff. But the singer is definitely very personable and interacting in a way that seems very genuine. Like I'm like, this, I think, is also a little bit different from going up there and frowning the whole time, or going up there and chastising the crowd because they're not going crazy enough. Like that sort of thing where it's like, you know, you guys are great, we love coming here. Like there's a lot more of that sort of thing than I typically see with like a metal band. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like this might be part of the reason that their live shows have the success that they do, in addition to all of the props. Like they had giant statues, and you know the drum kit was on some giant like Viking helmet with like flaming eyes. Like I was really astonished with how much money went into their stage set. I'm hard pressed to think of a metal band that I've seen that has been that elaborate. So they're clearly having success with it.
Maybe that's sort of the putting on a show aspect, is either you go the Amon Amarth route and like really hype up the theatrics, or maybe it is more of like a young person's game. So you like your Morbid Angels, your Carcasses, your Obituaries. I know that you've mentioned a bunch of non-metal bands that are far older than them, but these death metal bands, they know that the crowd are coming there for pretty much one thing, which is to just hear the classics and then maybe give a nod to the new album, because I know that people will lap it up, but I think they know that we're there to get the Carcass experience, so we want to hear the classics of Heartwork and Necroticism and so on, and they are basically delivering that to us. And maybe they are just getting bored of it, but they know that, it's obviously a source of income for them, but also it gives the fans what they want. Whereas if you get a younger artist, maybe bringing something new to the table, maybe leaving a bit of room in there for some kind of, live play, some improvisation, or doing something a little bit different. And as you said, it doesn't need to be ridiculous. It doesn't need to be going into, reggae or a dubstep breakdown, but it could be,
right.
Something just a little bit off the wall that maybe your Carcasses and Morbid Angels they're not in the game for that anymore. They're just, delivering to the fans what the fans expect.
Not really for Morbid Angel anymore, because last couple of tours, I believe, they've only been doing the Tucker era Morbid Angel songs. So none of the classics, quote unquote, everything formulas and
classics.
later.
If you're a fan of Tucker, though, some people dig his era.
I certainly do. You're talking like, for me, I think Gateways to Annihilation is, I think that's my second favorite Morbid Angel album. I think that thing is terrific.
And
I'd say it's up there,
So
your favorite is Domination, right?
my favorite is Domination, which people were shitting on back in the day, and probably to this day.
Oh yeah, that's the downward trajectory. Started with that album, and like even Trey said it was too sterile and all that, and Dave Vincent described the lyrics right there in a recording studio before he had to sing them out. So I feel that Morbid Angel is best the first four albums, which is Abominations, Altars, Bless, and the Covenant, and then Formulas was a good return to form, I believe. But Gateways was a little too polished for I got into it when it first came out because I was hungry for Morbid Angel, and I liked it for like a couple of years, but it just didn't really stay with me. Not like the quote unquote classics, but I saw your list of favorite albums, and there's good stuff on there, no doubt, but there's stuff that individuals have their own tastes and quirks and all that.
Sure.
Like the Luciferion, you have the Apostate as 22 on there, and I think the first one, it was a Demonication or something like that, the Manifest. I felt that one was the stronger album. So I see how our taste in metal kind of maybe we're both into extreme metal. I mean, I like the Apostate, but I would rank the first album a little bit higher because it was like a synthesis of Morbid Angel and Deicide. But the Apostate, they kind of went crazy with the keyboards and long-winded songs and all that. So was that the aspect that you liked about the Apostate more than the first one?
Well, so in terms of Luciferion, there's a reason that's on that list and that I ever think of it, and it's because my favorite power metal album ever by like a continent is the second Lost Horizon album, and my second favorite power metal album ever by a giant leap is the first Lost Horizon album. So this is that guy. This is like that Luciferion thing is it like maybe Wojciech Lisiski? So that's his death metal band. And so that second, the Apostate, really has that keyboard. It has, or as he called it. And are you familiar with Lost Horizon or no?
I've heard it, but it's been quite a few years. I'm not really big in power metal, but yeah, I remember there being really good riffs in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible stuff. Like, I don't listen to tons and tons of power metal, but like my holy trinity is those two albums and Blind Guardians, Imaginations from the Other Side. Like it's an easy question for me. Like, what are the best power metal albums? It's those three. So the Apostate has that, and as Wojciech said on the Lost Horizon album, not keyboards, my friend, soul healing euphoria generators. So yes, that Luciferion album has a lot of soul healing euphoria generators that to me work actually exactly as he's describing with that grandiloquent title. And it's just glorious stuff. But I like the other one, but that thing is That thing is monstrous and special. But to get a little bit more specific on the Morbid Angel thing, and I know, I mean, decades later, people are still like, domination sucks. And some of my affinity, I mean, I think it's great. So there's no disseminating on that. I think that's their best album, but I do go back and forth between that one and Gateways. And some is this, and I know you have like a classical piano background.
Hello, Zahler?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I thought this is a question for you, Jason. You have like a classical piano background, right?
Sort of. I've done a couple of concerts, and I have a necroclassical project too. So there's that.
Cool. So, and just in terms of some stuff, like Blessed Are the Sick, which I mean, that's the first Morbid Angel album I owned, and it got me into the band. But yeah, I mean, obviously the trigger drums, and I think the sound of it isn't very good. But you get something like Fall from Grace when it goes into the blast beat. I just feel like it's just drums happening at a speed, but it could have been recorded in another room at another time at another tempo. Like there's like a lack of some of that stuff hooking up that bugs me on that album, where the blast beats just seem like he's going as fast as he can, but it's not actually the tempo of the music that's happening. So I feel that there's a bit of a disconnect there. And David Vincent's still kind of trying to find his voice, I think, in terms of some of the singing. So you get things like "Come On," "Ancient Ones," "Tiamat," "Cthulhu."
No, he was mimicking Browning with that, because that's how Browning sang on Abomination.
Okay. Oh yeah. I haven't listened to Abomination nearly as much as you have. Like, I've listened to it a few times, but I like Blessed Are the Sick. But a lot of this is just going to come down to like consistency. I like the altar sound definitely much more. But some of the songs on that album, when it's just full on blazing speed, and this is my third favorite album, so I like most of it. But something like Suffocation, Damnation, Visions from the Dark Side, like some of that stuff, it's like, okay, it's aggressive, but not the kind of bewildering, otherworldly, Lovecraftian creativity that I want from the band. And in that regard, like, the album that is an H.P. Lovecraft experience, I think, is Gateways to Annihilation. Like, that album is predominantly mid-paced and slow, and I feel like the chasm's breaking open on that album, and I see the otherworldly gulfs. And I like every song on that album. So to me, that album I just think is incredibly consistent.
Weren't the lyrics like the Kabbalah, not Lovecraft, on that one?
I don't know. I've read along with it at some point. I didn't recognize what it was, but I'm just talking in terms of a feel. Like, I don't like it. It certainly could be that. But so that album to me has there's just really, really great stuff there. And then Domination, which everyone shit on, partly because of Where the Slime Live, and the evil laugh on that. I like the vocal variety on that album, and
Caesar's
I think
Palace.
Hate Work. Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff is interesting. I think the eyes to see, ears to hear, that like really fast 6/8 Eric Rattan riffing is cool. I like the Where the Slime Lives stuff. I like Dominate in terms of a straightforward song. Dawn of the Angry, I think, is all-time great. Morbid Angel. Hate Work is really good. Like God of Emptiness, that like giant kind of landscape, blasted landscape, kind of slower, more Death Doom sort of experience, and like the way the synthesizers work and all that, I think is great. So that album has a lot of variety. I think a lot of its bad rap comes from the Where the Slime Lives, but in terms of production, man, I think it's significantly better produced in terms of the sound and engineering than Blessed Are the Sick. I mean, it's locked in terms of production, in terms of coaching performance, and in terms of sound. I think the drums sound much better on this one than they do on Blessed.
I'll give you that.
Covenant,
I'll give you that. And I think, have you heard Entangled in Chaos, where they played the Blessed Are the Sick songs? I feel that I don't like the trigger drums because they're kind of overbearing in that recording, but I feel like the riffs are much meatier on that live album. texturally speaking, than they are on the Blessed or Sick. Just the few songs off of that, on Entangled in Chaos, I felt like, it's way better sounding, textually speaking, on Entangled in Chaos. So I'll give you that.
Yeah, I have that live album. I haven't spun it in forever. I probably, partly because I was like, oh man, they're doing like nothing off of Domination here, which to me is obviously just that, like, maybe there's like one song, maybe they do Dominate.
Yeah, they do Dominate on that
So
one.
they don't, yeah, but not much else. Like all these other ones that I'm talking about, they're not touching those. And then Covenant, you mentioned, is one that you also think is better, and I like all of these albums with the exception of that Terrible Industrial thing, the Elude, even whatever that thing is called. That I can't imagine even Trey likes at this
The
point.
Rob Zombie
With the
album.
exception of with the exception of that album, I like all the Morbid Angel albums. And but like pulling it out, like Rapture I think is good, Pain Divine I think is okay, World of Shit I think is okay, Vengeance I think is okay.
World
Then
of
you
Shit
get
is
Lion's Den, which
phenomenal. I love the riffs in World of Shit. I feel like the first three
Yeah.
songs of Covenant, like if that was just released as an EP, that would be like one of the best EPs in all history. Because the first three
so if you
songs,
think
they flow
if you
so
think that,
smoothly
then it
together.
makes sense.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if you think that, then it completely makes sense that you rank this really highly. For me, like, I love Rapture, and then the next three happen. I'm not really into them, and then Lion's Den for me is the gigantic step up. That ending when they go into that 6/8 where they keep at the drum fill, and then he kind of switches to kind of pulsing the 6/8 in a weird way, and they keep extending it, and it's this kind of elastic riff. And I don't know if David Vincent wrote that riff. I know he wrote some of that song. That thing I love. So for me, it's that. I mean, that's why Covenant I'm rating way below some of these. It's 2, 3, and 4. I could take or leave. Lion's Den I think is great. Blood on My Hands is pretty good. Angel of Disease, the ending of that to me is way too jokey. That like the
This is the most upbeat song in death metal.
Yeah, that back and forth when it's like dun, 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 bam, 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 dun, 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 and it's just doing this like seesawing back and forth between the doomy, slow, awesome Morbid Angel riff and this really happy kind of pump thrash riff. So that like I think overall it's a pretty good song, but that ending to me feels like humor. Like that feels like something like Zappa or somebody like that would do, like that back and forth between that. So that's a ding on that. Sworn to Black is great. God of Emptiness is great. So, but like these are the reasons like that I rate the one way that I do. Some has to do with some of these albums that people love top to bottom or whatever. There's some songs on them that I just don't care for. But it's like I like all of these albums. That, I like Morbid Angel has a completely solid catalog other than that one industrial thing, and I like the most recent one less than the best ones, but I still dig it. What do you think?
I would say just to cap that off, I do agree Domination gets a bad rep, although I will defend Blessed till I die. I would say Heretic is worse than Domination though, in my book.
Yeah, Heretic.
I think it's a bit clumsy and a bit unfocused and a bit kind of just made of spare parts.
Yeah, the Heretic is a mess. And the thing with Heretic, that for me is troubling is someone who like a lot of people talk about, oh, it's an album with no skips or this or that. Like the albums where I need to skip a lot of songs are albums I don't put on. Like I put on albums to listen from the beginning to the end. And if an album has a lot of tracks I don't like, it's something I'm rarely pulling out because I just like that. I feel that's the piece. That's the artistic piece is the album. And Heretic, there are some good tracks on there. I've spent not much time on it. And I interviewed Trey for that album back in the Metal Maniacs day, and that certainly amongst the worst of the interviews I ever did. And
was he spaced out? I've heard some older interviews that he did back in the 90s, like mid 90s and all that. And he seemed like really in his own world and spaced out and not consciously here in reality. Was he like that?
So it was an internet one. So I sent him questions, and I'll completely take blame here. I should not have been doing interviews. Like, I started with Iron Maiden, and I'm like, my first interview I'm ever doing with anyone, I'm arguing with Bruce Dickinson. It's probably obvious at this point, and from every interview I've ever done, I have a ton of opinions. This kind of stuff that I'm saying about the Morbid Angel album, these aren't helpful for a good interview when you're putting those in your questions to the artist, talking about how the drums are too triggered or things are out of sync or whatever. Like, it's stupid. Like, and I think it was sometime around then, like the Morbid Angel interview, and then I did one with Judas Priest, and I sat down with those guys, and that was better. But I was like, I don't think I'm cut out for the interview side of it, because I'm just interjecting my opinions way, way, way too much. And I should be writing, like, in terms of metal stuff, I should just be writing reviews and talking about the albums and what I like and what I don't, rather than like sort of pushing it into an interview and trying to skew it, because like when Bruce Dickinson tells me that Skunk Works is a metal album and I tell him it's not, like, this isn't like conducive to a good interview. Like, the straight up refutation of like the quality or genre of his work. And so with Trey, I was talking some about the triggered drums, and at some point in the interview I asked him, what's your favorite H.P. Lovecraft story? Like, seemingly the Attic Tote last name is taken from his stories. He's like, I've never read any H.P. Lovecraft in my life, which seems very hard to believe. But I think he was probably just annoyed with the questions. I think someone posted this interview online, like, this is bizarre. But it wasn't, and I said this in the introduction, like, it was me sort of learning, like, I have too many opinions with some of this stuff to do it, unless it's just a band where I absolutely like love all the creative choices they're making. And Morbid Angel is one of my favorite death metal bands. But I think if the drums were more locked in, particularly on the first three albums, I would like it more. Like, the blasting for me a lot of times just seems like a guy going fast, but not connected to the innate tempo of it, like Fall from Grace in particular. So that was an awkward interview. I mean, it's that Heretic album. There's all of the stuff where there's like giant gaps of silence and then a guitar solo or a hidden track, but none of that stuff was ever called like bonus tracks. So I always feel like, I guess I have to listen to this stuff if I'm listening to this whole album. And it's so discouraging, because I've never seen, if that stuff was all listed as bonus tracks, I would listen to that album more, because I wouldn't feel compelled to listen to silence and then a random guitar solo and then silence and some instrumental version of a song. Like,
well, yeah, it felt like they needed to condense the metal album and just release that, and then maybe just make a Dungeon Synth side project or something. Because some of it is, and I'm the same. I have to listen to an album all the way through. I don't skip tracks either. So when I'm doing that, I do sit through it all. But even then, just the metal tracks, they're okay. They're not up to standard, and they feel a bit phoned in at times. Some of the riffs kind of feel like a band trying to imitate Morbid Angel rather than the genuine article. But
I think they were trying to go for some like numerology thing with all those blank tracks and all of that, and it just became like way too abstract and disconnected from the album. So Heretic, that was one of those things. So I was still pretty young when that came out, and I got it super pumped, and I convinced myself that I liked it. That's never good. So I love the band so much, like, I'm going to force myself to like this. And that just listened to it, a couple of weeks and never listened to it again.
I mean, this is one of these things, like, also when it's complex music. I mean, I know an album that I wrote a lot of amazing stuff about, but I'd heard it once, and I didn't have a good assessment. Like, when Emperor announced they were breaking up, I was a journalist flown from the U.S. to interview them, and I was flown with Chris Bruni from Canada, who now runs Profound Lore Records, and we went out there and interviewed them. And hearing that Prometheus album once blasted in the studio on those fantastic speakers, like, I thought this thing was great. I'm like, this is going to be amazing. I know this is going to land, and that album, and I love the first three. I mean, I think Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk. I think I could prove in a court of law or in a science lab that is the best black metal album ever made and that ever will be made. I adore that album to death. And I love In the Nightside Eclipse, and I love Non-Equilibrium. And I like a ton of their demos. Like, I'm a huge fan of that band. And so I heard this music, and it's like, this shit sounds incredible. It's clearly more progressive. You got more kind of King Diamond and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son happening here. I'm going to love it. And it just never gelled. And I don't think it's a bad album, but I never have felt it has gelled as an album the way the other three and the demos have. And so that's, like you talk about, like that first opinion, and you convince yourself to like something. In this case, I was just overwhelmed by the quantity of interesting ideas, but it's like many, like decades later, it still feels like a collection of really interesting ideas. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
He's discovering himself as a solo artist, I think, because you listen to his solo work and it really is the follow-up to Prometheus, and it was him trying to move away from the sort of black metal but still a little bit progressive thing that you got on Non-Equilibrium, and even some elements of Anthems as well. But I think Prometheus is where he really started to move in. And no, we are now a sort of progressive extreme metal band, but we still have the elements of Emperor, and we're still releasing it under the Emperor name. But I think I consider that to be his first solo album, if nothing else.
Yeah. Shelley and I, we saw Emperor in London last year in 2022. And they actually opened with a song from Prometheus. And live, it didn't sound bad at all. Because I'm not really a big fan of that album.
Song?
What?
In the Wordless Chamber.
Yeah, In the Wordless Chamber.
That's the best song on the album.
Yeah.
I'm like, I wonder if he knows which one glues, and it does. Because I remember when I was talking to him, he's a super nice guy, and obviously a really smart guy. And it was over a period of days where I was like hanging out with the Emperor guys, taking pictures and interviewing them, and that was because at that point they made some my favorite music of all time. That was a better interview situation than some of these other ones where I came a little bit more challenging. But I remember, I was like, oh man, Elegy of Icarus, that thing is absolutely incredible. It's like, oh, that's always been my favorite song on that album, and no one ever talks about it. So I got on his good side sort of early on when we were talking about that sort of stuff. And he's very candid about the process of recording and all of that stuff, and how many amps they blew out recording Prometheus, because those are like, he's getting good guitar tones. That's not a bunch of like direct interface stuff. That's a lot of super loud amps. And maybe too sterile and maybe too clean, but it's a rich tone. How was the Emperor show? I'm curious to hear about that, because I saw them back in the day. They were kind of sloppy mess live, and then I heard some recording of that, maybe Infernal Fest or something in like 2009 or 10. I'm like, oh, they reunited, and they are much better live than when I saw them on. I guess they were supporting. Yes, it was a Non-Equilibrium tour, and they were. It was muddled. The sound wasn't good, but they weren't that together as a live band. And I saw him once later. It's a little bit better, but how are they now?
That was phenomenal. I thought it was phenomenal.
So I saw them on the 20th anniversary of In the Nightside Eclipse at Hellfest, and it was incredible because they played the whole album through, but they were playing with Faust, and obviously, he's still a very competent drummer, but there was a sense of sort of trying to fit the band back together because they'd not played consistently for a long time. And then I saw them again at Brutal Assault for the 20th anniversary of Anthems, and musically it was a much tighter show. And again, it was a very special experience because both albums are very formative to my sort of black metal listening career. But yeah, when we saw them back in May at Incineration Fest in London, and that was like a mixed show. So they had both Faust and Trim do different songs. They played stuff, well, as Jason said, they opened within the Wordless Chamber, but they played stuff from Equilibrium, they played stuff from Anthems and Nightside, and they even went all the way back to Wrath of the Tyrant as well. So you got like...
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you got the full breadth of the Emperor catalogue, but also they were tight as fuck. It was a really, really good show, both like musically and just emotionally as well.
One of the best shows I've seen. Period.
How are, like, you know, in terms of like, so Trim, and so he was a bit on the wild side in terms of his playing back in the day. So we think because, like, you know, and this is something I asked Nishan about, you know, back then, because, like, to me, clearly, like, you know, like, these are drummers playing far beyond the level I could play, but I can hear the difference. Like Faust is really, like, locked into the beat at a different level than Trim. Trim was wilder and could probably play faster, but that was also, like, I'm talking, you know, almost like 20 years ago in terms of the last time I heard Trim play something, and obviously these are people who are pushing towards the edge of human achievement in terms of drums. Did you get a sense, was one or the other better? Were they both excellent? Were they playing? My guess is they're both playing with a click. The stuff that I heard,
I would assume so. Yes.
I would have thought so, because they had a backing track, and obviously they got to be locked in with, like, the keyboards, or sorry, the euphoric device.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so I think the Trim, like, you can hear it all the way back on the last Enslaved album he played on Frost, where he's just overpowering the music with unnecessarily complex drums for what was essentially sort of Viking black metal. And he was trying to go in more of a jazz direction at that point. And that comes through on the Emperor albums that he played on. But obviously, much older musician now, he is, as you mentioned, like, locked in with the sound much more, and he fits exactly what the Emperor sound needs. And Faust, ditto, like, he's playing the tracks from his era, and yeah, he's sort of exemplifying that. And they're both basically doing the best versions of their styles, where Faust is, you know, he's still very technically competent, but he's doing the old school, like, kind of a deliberately sloppy black metal style, quite simple but still really kind of powerful and primal, and Trim doing the really tight, you know, lightning fast blast beats, and, you know, really tight fills and complex patterns that he's doing, but he's not overshining the other musicians. He's playing with them, not against them.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a show that I'd be interested to see, because there's some swirling around on those albums with him, and there's a lot of great playing, and I'm a fan of his work. But, you know, there are definitely times it seems like he's sort of pushing out and then, you know, locking back in. You know, Faust is just sort of more locked in. There's no, I didn't know that he had played anything with them at all. There's not a backlash in terms of his, let's say, highly questionable history in terms of him being at these events and playing. Everyone is just sort of cool with it, like he did his time, and now he's back in the band.
No, there was a backlash, especially because he didn't issue a public apology, but the attitude of the other members of the band and himself was kind of, he served his time according to Norwegian law. So as far as we're concerned, the matter is closed. And if you have a problem with that, then we're okay with you not coming to our shows or not being into black metal. These are Isan's words, not mine.
Okay.
That's basically their attitude to it. And, you know, there's some people that will probably never ever pay for a ticket again, and that's fair enough. That's their decision. But yeah, I guess everyone just has to take a stand where they want on that issue.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed like I remember when I asked him about the question, he wanted to be diplomatic because he didn't want to say Bart is, you know, that Faust is a tighter drummer and is more on beat, which to me, by my ear, is the case. But it was something, you know, this is whenever Prometheus came out, so this is still like around 20 years ago. Yeah, that you know, when I was out there, and it was something. I mean, I guess he was still in jail, so that was not something that people talked about at length. But certainly, I'm surprised to hear that they are doing that. But I'd be curious to hear what it all sounds like. And you know, like, my hope would be, because I've never really gotten into the Isan solo album. I think there's good material throughout. But I would be interested to hear him do something, you know, to go back, and with all the Emperor reunion stuff that he's had, like, does he just not have any interest in making a new Emperor album, or would it just be more of the same? Would it be more like, you know, like you said, and I agree with you that that last Emperor album sounds like an Isan album. 100% you're correct. I don't know if he feels he has any inspiration to write something more in the style of, Anthems and In the Nightside Eclipse, or that's just a thing of the past for him.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because his latest EP did actually sort of take things back to what was kind of a black metal, recognizably black metal direction. I wouldn't say it's, back to his very early roots, but it's definitely much more in that direction. Whereas some of his other solo work is, I wouldn't even describe it as metal, to be honest. He's sort of gone in sort of a very kind of weird prog rock direction, which I know isn't for everybody. Yeah. I think there's stuff of value in there. I don't like all of it, but yeah. But yeah, I don't think
there for sure.
Yeah, I don't think a new Emperor album would be the order of the day, because it would be similar to some of the death metal bands we've been talking about, in that they're playing live and they're doing these anniversary shows, and a lot of it is for maybe fans that weren't there the first time around, or want to see them, as you mentioned, like they weren't that tight back in the day, but now they are accomplished musicians, all of them, and they're all used to playing with each other again. So there's value to that. But I think if they were to make a new Emperor album, they just wouldn't mesh, because Samoth clearly isn't very interested in going in the hyper-progressive direction. Eiston clearly isn't that interested in moving too far back towards black metal, and Trim, I don't really know. I don't know if he's still sort of trying to push the jazz thing, or he's happy just going with the flow, but it doesn't feel like it would be called for. I think we'd get more value out of them all just pursuing their own musical goals separately.
Same. I mean, this Zyklon, that was like death metal. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, my comments might not age well if they immediately announce a new album later this year.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is we're speculating, and like, to me, kind of exactly what you said is exactly why I would like to see an Emperor album, because I think like Samoth stuff post. I mean, that first Zyklon album has a couple of interesting things. There's some good music on there, and then the rest sort of lost me. And the other like thrash thing he did, I checked out a tune. It just wasn't for me. And then the Isan solo stuff, there's always good music to be found on there, but I don't love his kind of like, in a way, the black metal scream thing for him has become, I feel it's almost like a dramatic presentation of that style of singing, where it feels kind of like rasp, whisper, like it doesn't feel very authentic to me. It feels like here's just the style he's singing in. So I sort of wish he would just like embrace just clean singing all the way, or if you're going to do the extreme vocals, have them actually be more extreme. So he's in this middle ground where it seems like this is the accepted style of what he does, and probably something he can reproduce live and do consistency, but it lacks the ferocity and the creepiness and of his early screaming stuff, like, through Anthems and some on the Nine Equilibrium, and it's like, and it isn't like he has a good singing voice. So I like if Isan became something like his solo career became something where he's just doing all clean singing, and maybe I don't know all the albums, maybe he did this once, but I'd be a little bit more interested in hearing that. But the idea of, with Samoth and Isan, like really having like diametrically opposed philosophies in terms of what they're doing, those two having to collaborate, I'll be interested in seeing the fireworks that come out for exactly the reasons as you said. Like if Samoth makes Isan go more barbarian, and then Isan makes Samoth think a little bit more, I think that could be an interesting combination. But again, who knows? Like, it could be more of the same. But like that sort of conflict, it's interesting. I mean, you listen, like, you get the back and forth on. I got really pretty deep in the Beach Boys this year, and it's like, yeah, you're hearing this like the Mike Love fronted Surfer stuff, and then this ultra weird, sad Brian Wilson trying to be happy, like Baroque melancholy. And there's something interesting when you have some of that back and forth. And a lot of my favorite bands have these vying personalities in there. Whereas, like, obviously the Isan solo stuff that has all kind of lost me, though yet remained kind of interesting. I think that's like, like he's just running loose in the prog metal world, and it is he's certainly coming up with a lot of interesting stuff, but he's just making music that overall appeals to me the way the Emperor stuff did.
don't think
Yeah.
I've ever heard one Ishan song ever.
You might not mind his first album, but I think the rest of it wouldn't necessarily appeal to you. I just off the top of my head. But yeah, I think the result of that prospective New Emperor album, it would either be an absolute triumph of, as you said, that duality of them sort of complementing each other's like opposite impulses, or it would be an absolute disaster. But either way, I don't think you'd ever get an average album out of it. So I'd love to see the results. But yeah.
Yeah, it's what it is. And there's also a little bit, and I've seen this a couple like veteran artists doing this. The OJs, I'm obviously a huge Soul fan. Like those guys, after sort of being in the wild and not really recording albums, really so much since the 70s and 80s. Like those guys getting back together and doing an album, the final word. It's this amazing classic, Philly soul group landing with an album that I think ranks amongst their best is really cool, because I've never spoken to anyone who's an Emperor fan who doesn't think that that Prometheus is a dramatic step down. I mean, I have spoken to people who think that Nine Equilibrium and Prometheus are both step downs, but I don't know. That is not ending strong in terms of the legacy, and so they've redeemed themselves certainly, and it could be just monetarily, but they've redeemed themselves certainly as a live act, because I heard that stuff from Inferno Fest or whatever. I'm like, this is completely competent live band, and if you listen to that other live Imperial Ceremony or whatever that thing is called, you can hear the Emperor that I saw live, which was let's say delivering the material at about a 70% level.
Is that where Ishan's wearing a white t-shirt?
Maybe.
I think I saw one where he's wearing like a white t-shirt and
yeah, he's got a shaved head and he's wearing a white t-shirt. Yeah, that's the Imperial Live Ceremony album. Yeah.
No, that was one I listened to once when it came out, and then I think more than a decade passed before I spun it again. I'm like, maybe this is better than I remember. And I listened and said, nope. But then I got that Inferno thing. It's like, oh, wow, this is completely competent. This is they're really on top of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely recommend you checking them out if they ever roll through your area or whatnot. So definitely a great performance. One of the best that I've seen. I would say like right when Dave Vincent got back with Morbid Angel, I saw them play in Tampa. And I was like right up front in the middle, and Trey was to my right, and David Vincent was right in front of me, and that was the freaking show. I loved it. So like Emperor and that Morbid Angel lineup, those are the two best shows for metal that I've seen.
Yeah, those are. I saw Morbid Angel on that tour as well. It was nice. It was I hadn't seen them. with David Vincent, because the first time I saw them was. Live was I think on the Formulas tour. It was like it's like, oh, they've returned to form.
Did they have the fans going blowing their hair?
What? No, I don't remember. I saw them I don't remember that being the case, but it was at the time people just thought it was a triumph, because certainly like back then it was everyone relentlessly shitting on Domination, which obviously an opinion I never shared, though it wasn't my favorite then. For a lot, like a testament to the quality of their work is that a bunch of these at different times have been my favorite. Like there was a time I would have ranked Covenant as the best, and at a time when I would have ranked Blessed Are the Sick. But I've landed on the three as my favorites for a while now. These are the ones that land for me. Did you guys see any other shows of note in the past year?
I saw Graveland in Finland, but
I didn't know that they played live.
They just recently started doing it like 5 years ago, and it's really strange. Like Rob Darkin, he has all these like session live guys, and he just does vocals.
Right.
But at Steelfest, he had the session guys sign autographs because he doesn't know English that well, and he didn't want to talk to people, so he had the session members sign autographs. I thought that was very strange, but it was pretty solid. But they used a lot of pre-recorded keyboard stuff, the choirs and all that.
Sure.
It just really seemed kind of fake not having someone actually play that. Just having that backing track, which was louder than the guitars. So that was kind of odd, but I dug it. And the rest of my time in Finland, I was hanging out with Marco. Like we went to the Helsinki Philharmonic to see Shostakovich, for instance. I had Marco Lejo from Beherit on one side of me and Yarno from Serpent Ascending and Desecracy on my other side. And we watched like a Mahler piece, and then we're mainly there for the Shostakovich. But I do have a great recommendation for you before we wrap up today. I know Shelley has to go to bed soon. It's really late there. But I noticed there's a lot of bolt thrower on your favorite albums. And I think you'll really love Desecracy. Desecracy is really like
I got it. I got it last week, and I really do like it.
Oh, you're ahead of me. So you already got into Desecracy.
Yeah. That is a good recommendation. Yeah, is this the dude from like Slugathor or something?
Yeah,
something
Yarno.
else, right?
Yeah, Yarno. And then, well, Desecracy now is just Tommy. He's doing it as a solo project, but he's still really good friends with Yarno. So Yarno is on, I think, the first 5 albums. But the album I would really recommend to you is the Doom Skeptron to start out with. But it sounds like you already got to them before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I enjoy this one, and we'll go deeper with that. But cool. Yeah. Let's let Shelley heal up and get some sleep. And I got my data to get to now that I'm awake.
Yes, sir.
And it was fun catching up. And it's enjoyable chatting about metals and having some cordial disagreements. and some well, I mean, this is the thing, like, you know why you like the ones that you like, and I like it isn't, but with this sort of thing, if everyone is like, yeah, I'm like, I can go through the albums and tell you the songs that don't work for me and why they don't work for me.
Yeah.
So I arrive at these with like, there's a thoughtful reason I'm there, but yeah, I know, like, putting Domination and Gateway this year, 1 and 2, Morbid Angel, not the most common choice, but
Yarno from Desecracy likes Domination too, and I gave him Koopa for that. But anyway,
well, for me, it's not what you like, but why you like it. I think that's more important. If you can explain your reasons, then, and I can explain my reasons to you, I think that's more important than us liking the same albums. So.
Everyone has different perspectives, and we can reach a common ground somewhere. So, but definitely check out Craig Zahler's Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. It is out now through Dark Horse, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know it took him thousands of hours to put together, but it only takes about an hour to read. And I do need to warn you that there is some nudity in there, so while you're reading it, you might want to cover your kids' eyes. Thank you very much for coming back on the program today, and hopefully it's the start of a good relationship. We can bring you back when your next project's done again. So thank you, Zahler.
Sure, my pleasure. We'll do something similar. We'll talk a little bit about whatever is the thing I've made, and then it will descend into metal madness for however long. I love chatting about. Yeah, I'm a lifelong metalhead, and I love chatting. I love chatting about this stuff. So,
excellent.
Anyways, have a good night, and chat with you later.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Bye.